Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at one of my no ID white Phalaenopsis orchid. This one is from my local grocery store, Trader Joe's, and it doesn't have any fragrance, but it's grown in a very interesting method that I want to share with you, and I want to share some of the experiments finding and the trick that I think works really well for this type of growing method. After this orchid finished its bloom, I decided that I want to unpot it, and I was at the time also trying to test out the whole moss media in a plastic cup with no drainage hole. This is the method that I use for this orchid. After I repotted this orchid into moss and in this container, within a week it started to shoot out so many new roots. It was amazing. It was almost like it was on steroids. It immediately adapted to this growing method with no adjustment period whatsoever. So it somehow, this orchid just loved the moss media. I can't remember what media it was in, but I want to say it's probably very likely it could have been a mixture of bark chips and sphagnum moss, because that's the typical media mixture for orchids at Trader Joe's. So this orchid immediately adapted to the moss media, pure moss media, in a container without drainage hole. And during late fall 2018, it started to shoot out a spike, which I was very, very excited about, because I think I even did a video. I think this orchid was part of the video where I said, look at my 35 orchids that are in spike that will bloom soon. I think this one was one of them, and it continued to grow, and surprisingly, this one did not have any bud blast that I can remember. I think this one altogether, in the end, you'll see, I think it's 21 or 22 flowers. It doesn't have any fragrance, but I think the color itself is rather stunning, because it's white, but then the newer flower has that yellowish tinge to it, and then as the flower gets older, as the flower matures, then that yellow color fades away to become almost white. And I say almost white because there is still a little bit of pink shimmering going on with the orchid, because if you take a closer look at the flower petals and flower sepals, you see that little it's almost like it has glitter on a thin layer of glitter glossing over the entire flower. It's really pretty. And I don't know, I mean, I'm just guessing that this probably has equestrias in its parentage. Maybe that's why it has so many, it's like multifloral. It has, the flower spikes are so long, and then it has so many buds. Because to be honest with you, I didn't really give this orchid any special care. Because it's grown in a cup with no drainage hole. So the most that I did was I made sure that I don't overwater. And here is the tip I really want to share with you. After experimenting with this method, for me, as a lazy orchid grower, as a lazy person, if I don't want to think about it, I only use 1/8 of a cup. It's very little amount of water, and I just dump it in. Right, and then I noticed that can last me at least 5 days, and then and then if I stretch it for another 2 days, then that's 1 week. And that's usually another round of watering for my other orchids. But if you want to give it a little bit more water, usually I would do a quarter. So that's it, 1/4 of a cup of water. That's it, and that'll probably keep it really moist, very hydrated for about 7 to 10 days or so. But I do soak this orchid with water once a month. That's because every small watering that I give this orchid, it's always water with fertilizer in it, right? And so you don't want to wait too long, because you don't want to have too much salt build up from your fertilizer. So once a month, I would soak this orchid with just pure water. And when it's time to do that, I usually keep the water level rather high, up to about 80%, 90% of the moss, and then just let it sit for, say, an hour. I don't even know. Just as long as, as soon as I remember, I'll go dump it out. And here's another tip. When you're dumping out the water, unless the orchid roots are already fully established in the container, in the cup, which means they already have latch onto the cup, right? Grab onto the cup. You really have to be careful that you're not turning this entire orchid almost upside down, because your orchid may just slide out and fall into the water bucket that's catching the water. So you want to make sure that this orchid is well established, so otherwise you really have to use your finger or thumb to somehow secure it so that it wouldn't just slide right out. And then you want to drain the water and until it would not drip anymore, and that's when you know that it's saturated wet enough, but yet it's not oversaturated with too much water standing at the bottom. So you want to wait until it wouldn't drip anymore, and then you put it back to where it is. I only use quarter strength fertilizer, 25% of the recommended strength. But a friend of mine has been testing with all his complex hybrid with 50%, and the result is actually better than mine in terms of flower count. However, because we're not really talking about the same type of orchid, so we are not comparing, apple to apple, oranges to oranges. So I would say good job, but I don't know if it's really the fertilizer concentration that's, making the orchid bloom with more flowers. But for me, I prefer weekly, and that just means that you much rather go with a lower percent of concentration, but then fertilize your orchid more frequently. And that's another great way to prevent burning your root, because sometimes if your fertilizer is just a tad too much, your roots can be damaged in a very negative way and potentially set back the orchid. It was very surprising to see this orchid, adapted to this method right away. There was no adjustment period, and the roots are now fully established within the container. There is another way that people water this type of orchid, and that is, you would add water, maybe half, maybe 80%, and then you wait for just a quick 10-15 seconds, and then you dump out the water. That's another way, but for me, that's a little, the water consumption for that approach is a little high, and I prefer to save water, so I use my quarter cup or 1/8 of a cup method, and then just kind of water it and then forget it. So that's what I call the Wi-Fi: water it and forget it. Overall, I think this method is really interesting. It's not for everybody, especially if you don't like moss. And also another thing is, this kind of method for medium size and bigger size orchid, it's very easy for them to become top heavy. So you have to make sure that you have a decorative container that is heavy enough. Otherwise, it's very easy for your orchid to topple, to fall onto its side. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!